Welcome to this week's episode of the JJ Redick podcast. I have a great guest for you today. He is David Solomon, the new CEO of Goldman Sachs. David and I have known each other for a little over 2 years. We've tried to stay in touch. We had met a couple years ago. I had the opportunity to speak at a conference in Napa Valley that Goldman Sachs was hosting for tech and media CEOs. I'm not really sure why I was on a panel that day, but got invited. David and I spoke after all the panels were done, and we've kept in touch. And in fact, about a year and a half ago, I did an article with GQ, and they asked me who would be my dream podcast guests. And I believe I mentioned Barack Obama, Bill Murray, and David Solomon. So I got one of my 3 guests on today. David has worked at Goldman Sachs since 1999. He was recently named the successor to Lloyd Blankfein, and he assumed his role as CEO on October 1st of this year. And I'm happy to present our conversation. Here's my conversation with Goldman Sachs CEO, David Solomon. I appreciate you doing this.
Sure.
So for background for the listeners, you and I actually do know each other.
Yes.
Sometimes I do these podcasts and I'm essentially cold calling, just showing up to people's offices or people's homes and asking them to come on the pod.
Uh-huh.
But we have a little bit of background. We met about 2.5 years ago in Napa at a Goldman conference that I actually got to speak at. We chatted a little bit afterwards and have exchanged text messages and got together this summer for a nice meal. And we've been trying to get this pod done. So I appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to do it. And I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit. I really enjoyed that dinner this summer. Also meeting your wife.
Yeah.
And so I'm thrilled to do this.
We'll talk about wine some, I'm sure, but the dinner this summer was probably one of the most epic, sort of wine tastings that I've ever had in my life. So I appreciate you and our friend Jeff.
It was five great people sitting around a table, having a great conversation and drinking some delicious wine. And that's one of the things that's nice. Food and wine gives you an opportunity to share with people and also to talk about what's going on in the world, what's going on in life. And I think it's something that enriches all of us.
My wife, Chelsea, commented afterwards that normally when she goes out to dinner with me, I'm sort of the rock star.
No, you were the rock star.
In that room, out in the Hamptons, you, my friend, were the rock star.
Yeah, well, that's just because the crowd was too old to really know much about basketball. But in my eyes, you were the rock star.
I always like to ask sort of the non-sports guests, no offense, just sort of a brief synopsis of your own sort of sports fandom and what teams you root for, what sports you're interested in.
Sure. So I grew up in the New York area. I grew up out in Westchester County, and I was born in 1962. So I think that my first real exposure to sports in a way that I remember was when I was, just turning 8 years old, and Joe Namath and the New York Jets won the Super Bowl. And Joe Namath, at that point in time was just a legendary figure. And, the buildup and the unexpected nature, of that win at that point in time, even though I was 8 years old, I remember it vividly. And I think it's what really turned me on, to sports. And it's my first clear memory, of really, being enamored. Now it followed very quickly with the Mets winning the World Series. And so, when you kind of put that all in perspective, growing up in New York, I would say my early days were shaped, being a Jets fan and then a Mets fan. And then of course, in the spring of 1970, the Knicks won the World Championship. With Willis Reed and David Busher and Bill Bradley, and Dick Barnett, and just an epic team. And I would say that as a New Yorker my whole life, that was the pinnacle of New York sports. And it's been all down. It's been all downhill. It's been all downhill. It's been all downhill since then. And so, I've always been a Jets fan. I have 2 brothers. My dad was a huge Giants fan. He grew up outside New York, huge Giants fan. And one of my brothers was a Giants fan and the other brother was a Jets fan. And I've never really warmed to the Giants, but I've become over the years a Mets and a Yankees fan. I'm a
well, you've got to entertain clients.
and
they want to go to the Yankees.
But I also, it's been I can appreciate, the greatness of that franchise, and being a part of New York and really realizing how wonderful it is, to have that kind of a franchise over such a long period of time, in our city. And that doesn't mean that the Mets aren't a great franchise, and there haven't been periods of time where their extraordinary play hasn't really warmed the city. Yeah. But it's just fun to be in New York. And look, I'm a Rangers fan. I have a picture that my kids tracked down. I was at Game 7 of the 1994 Stanley Cup when the Rangers won the Cup. I'd always loved hockey. I was at the game, and I happened to be 8 to 10 rows behind the goal the Rangers were defending in the third period, and they kind of all, swept in, right there. And there's a very famous picture of that moment, taken. And my kids found the picture and blew it up. And, you can see me with one of my friends, standing in the crowd there with hair, because it was quite a number of years ago. And so it's a long-winded way of just saying, I enjoy New York sports. I have Knicks tickets and go to Knicks games, regularly. I have Yankees tickets, go to Yankees games regularly, but I also go to a couple of Mets games a season, and I go to a few hockey games a season. I go to a few Jets games a season, and I'd go to more because I really enjoy it. But with everything you've got going on,
sure.
It's, their choices.
Sure. Yeah. It's so interesting that your first sports memory was of the Jets winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I've talked about this before on my podcast, but my first sports memory was Christian Laettner hitting the shot to beat Kentucky.
Yeah.
And I became a Duke fan that night. I've always rooted for winners.
Well, they are a winner. That's talk about an extraordinary franchise. Yeah. That's extraordinary. Coach K is extraordinary.
He is. Yeah. He is. And learned a ton from him. For the listener who doesn't necessarily know your background, and I'll go into this, I'll have gone into some of this in the intro, but just kind of take us through, you've been in the financial industry for 35 years, basically, and take us through sort of your career path and how you got to this point now as the CEO of Goldman Sachs.
Sure. So I grew up, as we said, in Westchester, and I was fortunate enough to go off to a terrific liberal arts college in upstate New York, Hamilton College. And I did not go there with a goal of going into the financial world. I thought I was going to go to law school. I wasn't really sure what I would do, but I went to Hamilton. I had a great experience there. I studied political science and in American history. And I kind of fell into my first job because all my friends up at school were all coming to New York. And in, this period of time, 1984, the financial world was kind of opening up. And a number of the financial institutions were offering these terrific training programs to come get a job, get paid, and get some more financial education. And so my first job, I was hired at the Irving Trust Company, which was a commercial bank. I think probably the most prominent thing about it was its address was number 1 Wall Street, a building that still stands there today. I went to work and went through this training program for a year. And it was really like going to business school while working. And so it was a good program. Went through it for a year, and then I got placed into a bank in the job, and I was actually applying to go to business school. And in 1986, I got hired by Drexel Burnham Lambert to work under the business that was run by Mike Milken. And, that business was exploding at that period of time, the business for junk bonds, as they were called then, or high yield bonds. It was a new business. And it was really extraordinary to be a young person in that business. I think we were probably given more rope than we should have had. It was very, very entrepreneurial. But it was a very, very good experience. I learned a lot. But then Drexel Burnham promptly went out of business in 1990. And, that was actually something that was interesting because it showed me the fragility of financial markets, financial firms. It was a very, very quick lesson in all of that. And so I continued along in my career. At this point I'd been working for 5 or 6 years. I hadn't gone to graduate school, but I really enjoyed it. I think it was my experience at Drexel really showed me that this particular profession was one that was very entrepreneurial. Every day was different. You had an ability to connect with clients in all different ways and really have an impact on what they were doing, their business. And I really enjoyed that. And I found that I thrived in it. After Drexel Burnham, I wound up going to work for Bear Stearns, and there's no pattern developing here. But again, the fragility of this, and I had a bunch of success at Bear Stearns that led me to relatively senior positions there at a relatively young age. And I really thought I'd spend, the bulk of my career there. But in the late 90s, I was competing for a piece of business that actually was to finance the development of Sheldon Adelson's casino business in Las Vegas when he was first developing it. And I was competing with some people from Goldman Sachs for that piece of business, and we wound up doing it together. And at the end of that, the team at Goldman Sachs started recruiting me to come to Goldman Sachs. And so after a lot of back and forth and to and fro in 1999, at 37 years old, I decided to come to Goldman Sachs. And it turned out to be a great decision, especially given, the history of Bear Stearns 9 years later. But it was a great decision because it was a long-term decision. And it was putting me in a position of working for what I believe was at the time and is, the greatest financial firm, and just a lot of runway to do things on a much broader scale. And I'm really, really glad I made the decision.
You mentioned a few reasons why you were sort of initially attracted and initially enjoyed those first few years working at Drexel. Are the reasons that you stayed in this industry different than the reasons you got into it?
The reason I got into it is I need a job. and I'd like to go back and say that I was so thoughtful about all the different jobs I could have taken. But as I said to you, my friends were headed to New York, and in the early 1980s, if you were coming to New York, there was kind of advertising, there was retail, and there was finance. Yeah. I mean, that's a generalization, of course, but those were kind of the big buckets where young people, if they went to New York to go get a job and get trained to get some experience, those were what you would do. And so I stumbled into it. But my reason for staying was I had lots of opportunities along the way to go do other things, but I really enjoyed the diversity of the day-to-day experience, the interaction with people, which is constant, the entrepreneurial nature of the work that I talked about. And, I found that I really thrived. One of the things I found and I discovered is I really thrived in a larger environment. In other words, there are things about being a larger institution that are very appealing. There are also things that are very appealing about being a smaller, entrepreneurial business. But as I worked along, I found that I really liked the network of people, the way you learned from all these people, kind of the apprenticeship culture that exists in an organization like this. So you've got people with a lot more experience that feel compelled to pull you along and teach you. And I felt that I really enjoyed it, and I kept learning and I kept doing more. And there just wasn't a compelling reason, to go do something else. One of the things that happens is young people come to see me here, and there's a shifting nature of how young people think about work. They're much more focused today on what's next than I was, when I was in my 20s, for example. And somebody recently came into my office and said, I want to talk to you about what I should be doing next or how I should progress my career. And I said, okay, tell me about how you're doing. How do you like your job? And she said to me, oh, I love it. It's great. I said, okay, do you like the person you're working for? I'm working for this woman who's extraordinary, really extraordinary. I'm learning from her. I really admire her. She's teaching me a lot. I said, that's great. How about the kind of work you're doing? Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, the days fly by. I'm so interested in what I'm doing. I'm really enjoying it. How about the people that you work with? Great group. We work hard together, but then we're out on the weekends. It's really wonderful. And I said, so what's the problem? And she said, well, I'm just thinking, what should I do next? I'm like, go back to work and enjoy it. Very few people are ever at a point in time where they like who they're working for. They like the work they're doing. They like the people that they're working with. If you're lucky enough to get that, go ride it. And I felt like through my career, I had a lot of that. And it kept me moving forward.
I think a little of that is just human nature. Maybe it's just not the younger generation. I don't consider myself sort of part of that younger generation. But if you were to ask me all those same questions, I would probably give you all those same answers. I absolutely love what I do. The work is fulfilling. I love the organization I'm with. But I think part of me is always, I've always been this way, but it's part of me is always looking for that next thing. What is next? Some of it is just feeling unease. I think about uncertainty in life, beyond just sort of making a career choice. It's that uncertainty.
Well, I think you're right. There's human nature to that for sure. And I do think there's a difference between, working through a career in finance and being a professional basketball player.
That's true.
There is, for good or for bad, there is a time limit.
That's true.
On the ability to play professional basketball at the level that you play it.
Unless you're Vince Carter.
Well, okay, maybe Vince Carter's a different story, and he is. But at some point in time, you're still going to be a relatively young person who needs to have a second chapter.
Yeah.
And so, that creates perspective. But I do agree with you. There's a human nature to we look for this in people, strivers, that strive for what's next, what's better, how can I improve, tend to do very well professionally in almost anything they do. And so you look for strivers a little bit, and there's definitely human nature in that.
One of the first things you ever said to me, I think in our very first conversation a couple of years ago, was that very notion of that end period as an athlete, and then still having roughly 30 years, 35 years to have a whole second career.
Yeah.
As I get closer, right, to the end point, and I'm not there yet, but as I get closer, I think about it more and more. And part of me recognizes, that I've built up sort of equity in the basketball world.
Right.
And I could pursue a different career in media or front office or coaching or whatever it may be. And the other part of me has no interest in doing that and wants to find something new and exciting. And I think one of the challenges, not just for me, but for any athlete that finishes their career, and really I've talked to friends that have done this in the last few years, is they want to do something different, but they struggle, I guess, with sort of that credibility issue, because you're lacking 15 years of experience. You're starting at the bottom again. And I think that's really hard for athletes.
It's definitely challenging, but it's one of the things that when we first met that really intrigued me about you, and kind of attracted me, that I wanted to learn more about you. You're incredibly intellectually curious. And, even though, at the point that we met, I mean, you're in the middle of an accelerating career.
Yeah.
You had an intellectual curiosity around things away from sports, and away from what you were doing that was very, very high. And I think that's an asset or an attribute that'll help you in whatever you choose to do next. And candidly, it'll open doors up to you, to give you other opportunities.
One of the other thing you mentioned this summer, and I think I was sort of going to ask you about your own skill set and how that has evolved throughout your career. But, one of the words, or two of the words you mentioned this summer at dinner, was sort of, for an athlete, diligence, discipline, and those things sort of carry over into any world. And I think the curiosity part is huge too. Listened to you on several podcasts and read a ton of stuff on you. And I think you're a curious person as well. And one of the things that curious people do is they read. They like to basically go all in on something.
Sure.
And that's something that you do as well.
Yeah. I think there are all sorts of skills that can help you professionally. And there's no question that, being intense and focused and purposeful about what you do are really important things when you're building a career over a long period of time. And it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And so I think those things have helped me. But I also think it's really not about just success in your career. It's about success in your life, and really having a life that's rich and fulfilling. And to do that, especially if you're fortunate the way we are to be given, to have opportunities to really live to the fullest, the more you can add to your life, the more you enrich it. And part of it is you enrich it by you meet new people and different people through different experiences and different things that you focus on. But I've really recognized that it's this long road, and you go down it, and there are different stages and different phases. Clearly when my kids are now, I have two daughters who are in their 20s, but when they were younger, there was a lot of time, spent focused on them. Now that they're older, that frees up a whole basket of time that allows you to pursue other interests.
Yeah.
In addition to whatever you're pursuing professionally.
Yeah,
it's don't wish it away, because it's interesting as you get there. I look back and I'm like, wow, where did that go? That went so quickly. And it's not that I felt like I missed it, but I'd like to go back and experience some more of it again. And I'd also like to experience some more of it again with the context of being a little bit older, more mature, and more evolved. And so don't wish it away. But it's
no, I'm hoping for self-sufficiency at this point.
Yeah.
Just like the ability to put your underwear on in the morning
that's a good
without
one.
an
But
aid.
it happens quickly. I mean, I remember the days, I'd be so tired from a long week at work, and it was 5:30 in the morning, and the kids were already running around the house, or they're pulling you out of bed, and
that was this morning.
Whatever.
For me.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, I remember it was like nothing, and it would be Saturday morning, and I'd sleep in till 8 or 8:30, and I'd get up and I'd go to the gym, and I'd come back from the gym, and I'd sit and I'd have coffee, and I'd read the paper, and I'd look at my watch. It would be 11 o'clock, and everybody was still asleep. And so, it changes. It changes very, 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 very quickly. And no matter what, it feels, as you live life, it feels like there's a lot going on. But as you look back, it's like, wow, where did it go? But still, to your point, and I think it's an important point, even now, I look, and I'm 57 years old, but, God willing, I'm healthy. I can have a whole, besides just what I'm doing now, I've got, 30, 40 years to have other chapters. And there's lots to do. And it's great to find things that you like, you're passionate about, both professionally and personally, and really go after them.
One of the things, you were kind of bringing it up now, but one of the things you are a big proponent of is having this work-life balance. And you've talked about it in terms of the culture and the work environment here at Goldman Sachs. But I do feel like, at least in my life, and when I look at sort of high-level people, there's a little bit of a contradiction, because I am singularly focused on something. I would even use the word at times obsessed.
That's why you're really good at what you do.
Yeah, but and at the same time, if I don't allow myself other outlets, I end up resenting the very thing that I'm really enthusiastic and passionate about. And it's this weird sort of balance that I have to live. And I think, in talking at least to athletes, I think we all sort of struggle with that. You used the words earlier, intense and purposeful. And so you're doing this. And as a young person, especially, who's just starting out in their career and has these goals and doesn't necessarily have the resources yet, or the freedom, the rope to sort of have that balance, it's a huge challenge.
It is a challenge, and I don't want to in any way come across as not recognizing that especially as you're starting out, it's a lot harder, to have the opportunities and to do other things. But what I'd like to reflect back is I'm still working very hard, but I worked very hard for a long time to put myself in a position where the opportunities that are available to me, both personally and professionally, are, more varied. And, it's just, again, there's very little in life that's easy. Things that are worthwhile come from investment and time, and there'll be failures and bumps along the way. Resiliency is important. How when you fall, because everybody falls and everybody screws up, you get up and dust yourself off. And, I'm very lucky here to have the opportunity to work with so many talented young people. It's one of the great things about Goldman Sachs. Over 70% of our 40,000 employees are millennials. It's a young firm at the end of the day. And they're so talented, so motivated. Such a privilege to work with them. But when I'm trying to give some advice, one piece of advice is, you've got these goals, you've got these ambitions, and it's going to be hard. There are going to be bumps, there's going to be ups and downs, but you don't have to have all the answers right away. You don't have to get to the finish line right away. You don't have to know what's next right away. You don't have to know where it's all going to go. Just live it and try to enjoy it as much as you can.
I wrote down this saying a few years ago. It was around the time that I had my first son. Mm-hmm. And it was essentially less time now, more time later. Meaning, put in the investment, put in the work now on my NBA career. Much to the chagrin of Chelsea during the off season, we still battle about that. But I train how I train, and there's really no negotiation there. And then in the hopes that, as my kids grow, I will be able to sort of have more time with them, because that right now, that's, to me, is my biggest challenge, is that I really enjoy being a dad, and it's my favorite thing in the world. And being on the road, commuting back and forth, it presents some challenges. We can't talk about work-life balance on this podcast without me mentioning and asking you about music.
Mm-hmm.
You are a DJ. Would you say it's on the side, or would you say it's like a second profession?
It's not a profession. I would say it's a hobby.
Okay.
I would say it's a hobby, and it's a hobby because I enjoy it.
Yeah.
But it's far from a second profession. But I might say that if I was a lot younger and I hadn't chosen this path, it could have been a fun profession.
Sure.
But it's a hard profession, for sure. But it's a hobby. And, you were talking about the intensity of your training, your work, and sometimes you need to do other things. One of the things I love about it when I'm actually doing it is I'm just focused on that. I've got a lot going on in my head 7 days a week, related to work. And, when I do this, I'm focused on this, and, it kind of clears my head, which I think is important.
Do you remember the first time that you played a set in front of people?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it wasn't that long ago. This is something I took up, later in life. And so the first time I played a set as a DJ in front of people was about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I'd been very fortunate to be introduced to Paul Oakenfold. And we had developed a relationship, and he had introduced me to some people who had been teaching me how, over a number of years to DJ. And it was really as a hobby, on Sunday afternoons. And I did it just as a hobby, and I did it for my own entertainment, but I had never done it in front of people. And at some point, he had heard that I actually was developing some skills. And so in a very, very generous way, he was very generous about this. He called me and he said, "Look, I'm playing in New York. I'm playing at Marquee, in New York. Yeah. And, why don't you come and
don't know that is a nightclub.
why don't you come take the first hour?" Yeah. And I said to him, "Well, I've never done this." And he said, "Look, it's an hour, pick like 10 tracks you want to mix together, practice a little bit." And, he said, "Look, it's going to be from 11 to 12 when the club opens. There won't be a lot of people there. So you don't have to worry about whether or not it's any good." So I show up, and at 11 o'clock when the club opened there, my daughters were there with a few of their friends. That was about it. But by 12 o'clock, it was pretty busy, and I was hooked. I mean, It was just the ability to see the music influence people and see people respond to it. It was cool. And so I started working at it. I started doing it, casually, once a month. And then because of my job, it got written about. And, at that point I said, well, I either have to work at it a little bit more and really put a little bit more into it, or I have to stop. And I decided, I like this. Yeah. I know it's different than what somebody in my professional position might do, but, why shouldn't I? And so it's a hobby. I do it, once a month, once every 6 weeks. I'm producing some music, which has been very, very cool. Yeah, to learn about that process and to go into a studio and remix music and produce some music. And it's a great outlet. And generally the time I get to do it, I do it Sunday afternoons. And, I do a lot of traveling. And so, you're flying around on airplanes and I used to, when I was done working on a plane, I used to watch television shows and movies, and I still do some of that. But now, I also curate music, play with music. And so it's been a great outlet for me. It's been a lot of fun. I think it's really as a business professional, it's also, I think, connected me a little bit to a lot of the younger people that I work with. Maybe makes me a little bit more accessible to them.
Sure. And the night you played at Marquee, did you have your moniker already?
I didn't.
But you do have a moniker. And people can find your music on Spotify, right?
Yeah, you can find, I've got one track that's been released on Spotify, although I've got another track that's an original track I'm going to release soon.
Great.
Up on SoundCloud. I've got a couple of hour-long mixes that give you an indication of the kind of, house music, I play. But it takes a lot of work to curate that stuff and put it up, and I don't have a lot of time, which is why, it's episodic.
Sure.
But it's
DJ Saul, right?
D-Saul.
DJ D-Saul.
Yeah.
I was into rap music.
Uh-huh.
And my rap name was J Red. Also not incredibly creative.
Not incredibly creative. I will not take and it's interesting. One of my daughter's friends, we were chatting about this,
Sure.
When it started, and I I needed a DJ moniker. Actually, I think I put it together for that time when I went to play at Marquee.
Okay,
I mean, it would have been advertised or anything, but it was just. And one of my daughter's friends, well, you're D-Sol. Just use D-Sol. And I was like, okay, we refer one of my daughters as K-Sol, one of my daughters is C-Sol. So
makes sense.
It was simple enough.
For all the young people out there that vacation in the Hamptons, they probably know what Gurney's is. Gurney's is a resort in Montauk, and you played a set there this summer. I was trying to make it, but my family was with me, so I apologize. I would
no reason to apologize
in the future. On a more serious note, I want to sort of ask you about leadership, and first of all, just in terms of the characteristics that you see again and again in great leaders and what characteristics great leaders have, but also how your own, because you've been in a position of leadership since your early 30s, I want to say, based on your bio.
Yeah.
and just how your own leadership style and your thoughts on leadership have evolved over the last 25 or 30 years.
Yeah, well, it evolves a lot and you learn. And I think one of the things that you have to do when you're in a position of leadership is you've got to be watching and learning from other people constantly. And it's interesting that we're talking about this because yesterday I did a Talks at GS, which is our talk series with General Stanley McChrystal, who's just written a book on leadership that I think is a very, very, very interesting book because he actually puts forward a thesis that I think is a very interesting thesis that we have a view of leaders. We put leaders up on a pedestal and we view them a certain way, but leaders, like all of us, are just human beings. They're fallible. They get a bunch of things right. They get a bunch of things wrong. But, myths kind of arrive around certain leaders. And those myths can evolve over time as you understand things better. And he talks, about a range of people, from George Washington to Robert E. Lee to Coco Chanel and Walt Disney. And he talks about, the leadership they provided in doing the things they did, but also if you actually kind of peel it back and look, while they were great leaders, they were also fallible as human beings, and they weren't always great in what they did. And so, I think one of the things about leadership is you're going to get some things right, you're going to get some things wrong, and you've got to be willing to learn, change your view, be open, and you've got to figure out how to listen. And one of the things just being kind of critical or observant of myself, I'd say I'm a much better listener at 57, than I was at 37. And, I can be, very strident, very opinionated. But I change my mind. And I'm willing to change my mind. I'm willing to say that I'm wrong, even if I had been very, forceful, about a point of view. I just think you realize when you're given one of these jobs that you do have to set tone, but boy, you've got to be open and you've got to be flexible and you've got to be willing to understand you're going to get a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong. And how you adapt and adjust to the things you get wrong, really important. How you respond to adversity, really important. And so there's no right way, and I'm still learning.
We being the 76ers, were recently visited by a general. We typically do a few sort of guest speakers throughout the season. And General Dempsey came and spoke to us last week, actually. And first of all, he's brilliant, but he gave a great talk. And the thing that he said that really stuck with me was, as a leader, exerting your influence versus exerting your authority. And I think as I've gotten older, and I'm still got a lot to learn on leadership, and I've both become a leader, but also watched other leaders, I think that's the thing that I have most appreciated about great leaders, is that they exert their influence and not necessarily authority. Not necessarily this is the way we're going to do things, but you mentioned flexibility, right? That ability to sort of adapt and listen, and having the emotional intelligence to not manipulate, but influence people to sort of see things your way.
You've got to, I think the language he uses is great. I think you have to bring people along.
Yeah.
And so you have to use your influence. There are times when a leader has to make decisions, and the decisions aren't always going to be popular. One of your jobs is to listen to lots of different points of view, but ultimately invariably there are places where you have to decide, turn left, turn right. And you have to make that decision. And generally when you make those decisions, there are going to be people on turn left and there are going to be people on the turn right side. And your job is to listen to it all, make the decision, but then bring everybody along. So when the decision's made, if you decide to turn left, everybody goes in that direction. It's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about here as we're evolving, certain things in our business, is there are things that I'd want to go faster on. But just to your point, I'm trying to exert my influence, but I'm trying to get the collective leadership group to move in that direction and to really embrace it. And if you can do that, you're just going to be in a better place. And so I think that concept of, exerting influence, but not forcing it is a really nuanced skill.
Do you think that there is a greatest strength or most important sort of characteristic of yourself as a leader?
Look, I think all leaders are different. Everybody has a different style. I think I've benefited at the firm in my leadership style for being direct and candid, but fair. And I think about that a lot. And people have said that to me. Sometimes you're very direct, you're very candid, but you're fair. And so as long as they say, but you're fair, I feel like I have the balance right. Yeah. If they were just saying you're direct and candid, but they weren't also saying you're fair, I might say, well, maybe you've got to adjust a little bit. And so, look, I think you gain, if you work in an organization, you gain, a reputation over time. And one of the things that's interesting about reputations is, a lot of it has to do with perception. And so perceptions develop, some of which are right and true and some of which aren't. And one of the things you have to do as a leader is you've got to be open to kind of hearing what the perceptions are, deciding which ones are right and you want to live with and which ones aren't right and you want to change. And, I do think that leaders can change. I do think they can evolve. And I think one of the things that's helped me as a leader and as a human being in this organization, I've evolved, over the 20 years I've been here. And I think if you're not evolving and you're not moving forward, it's hard to lead an organization.
My most recent podcast was with Jimmy Butler, my new teammate with the 76ers. And we actually were talking about leadership. And I think one of the things that's hard for an athlete is being, I would say, too direct and too candid in the heat of the moment. Mm-hmm. And because the emotions are running so high during a game, it's hard to sort of dial it back. And so there is this sort of element of emotional intelligence after the fact and following up with people and being like, hey, probably shouldn't have spoken to you that way in that situation. But that to me is one of the real challenges within a game of sort of managing people is just taking that emotion out of it.
Yeah, well, I can assure you the level of intensity and the emotion that I see on the basketball court during games, that's not typically the day-to-day here. Yeah. We have more of an ability to take a breath. It's not happening real time. It's not on the clock, the same way. But I can see how that's complicated because I just, one of the things that's so exciting about live sports is the emotion, the passion, and the intensity of the moment. And I think in most of the things we do professionally, you've got more of an ability to kind of absorb and think, everything doesn't have to be now.
Right.
And that gives you an ability to be thoughtful about how you proceed.
I want to bring up the issue of control. Mm-hmm. And, as an athlete, there is so much that is out of our control. And so we talked about this briefly at dinner, but, the preparation, right? The training in the off season, your diet, all those things.
In control.
Yeah. Those are the things that I can control. Yeah. In your job, well, for anyone really working in the financial industry, there's all sorts of things that are out of your control. Political climate, natural disasters, the markets sort of do what they want to do sometimes.
Absolutely. Not sometimes, all the time.
Yeah, true. Do you struggle with that? Are you able to sort of let go of any notion of control?
It's the reality. It's the reality of, well, you don't let go of any notion because it's the reality of our job and what we do. And the way I actually think about it, and I think about it this way, there are a whole bunch of things that you can control and there are things you can't control. On the things that you can control, you have to be incredibly buttoned up, focused, and right with a real level of excellence, execution excellence on everything that you can control. And if you do that, you're going to be better equipped to deal with what you can't control and what the world throws at you. And it's interesting. I mean, it's one of the analogies, and I said this, there was a point in my career where I ran our equity capital markets business, which is a business that takes companies public or raises equity for companies. And when you talk to an entrepreneur or a CEO, a founder of a business that was going to go public, I'd always say one of the things about an IPO or taking a company public is there are a whole bunch of things, a couple of hundred things that you have to do that you can control. And our job, if we're working with you to do it, is to make sure that we identify all those for you and we help you have them all buttoned up and executed with the highest level of excellence. No matter what, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that happens during this process that you can't control. And by being buttoned up and being focused on all these things and getting them right, we'll be in a better position to respond and adapt and adjust to all the things the world throws at us. And if you get that balance right, you'll have a good execution and it all works. But you've got to be, and I think any of these jobs, accepting of what you can control and what you can't. But I think people that execute well because on the stuff that they control, they're really tight. Businesses that are well-run are tight on the stuff that you can control.
We still, though, live in a very results-oriented world, and that is my world every night.
Yeah.
Right.
Every night, that's your world.
Every night, that is my world.
And that's a little bit different.
And I'll use the example of, we're recording this on Thursday morning. I used the example last night. I literally couldn't make a shot. Couldn't make a shot. I think I shot 5 for 15, but I missed shots that I normally make. And I'm driving home last night and I'm in my mind replaying every shot. I'm thinking about, did I do anything differently? What did the last 3 days look like? And I'm like, no, I ate well. I slept 10 hours. I took my naps. I did my pregame. I'm going through all these things, and those are the things that I can control. So I still get so caught up, right, in the actual results, like to the point where I'm a little sick to my stomach.
Yeah. Well, you can't control why one night, you're 5 for 15, and one night you're 10 for 15.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a really interesting thing in the context of what you do. I mean, it's a game of inches, and some of it's in your head. Oh yeah. At a moment in ways you can't. I mean, it's golf's a very, very different sport, but I think about, a professional golfer, that's standing on the green and has to putt.
Right.
Okay. And the fraction of difference, by the way, taking a jump shot is no different. The fraction of difference and what's going on in your fingertips, the way you come off the ground, the way your hands and your arms are positioned, what you're looking at, what's distracting you, how all of that, at the margin can affect, the arc of the ball.
Yeah.
That's a very tough thing to always get right.
What you're describing is something I talk about a lot, and that's mastering mechanics.
Yeah, mechanics
in imperfect environments.
Yeah.
And I believe that in what you do, there's an element to that on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Master. And again, I think it's similar. We're talking about the same things. Mastering mechanics, that's actually something you can control.
Right.
But there's stuff going around you.
The imperfect environments
around you can't control. So, using the same example, you're getting a company ready. You can control all the things, but you can't control that the day you actually are going to go public, the market's down 3%.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to affect your result. You're not going to be happy with the result, but you couldn't control that. But you got to respond to it.
You're fairly new in your new role. October 1st, I believe.
That's correct.
That's when the official sort of succession took place, as with your new role as CEO. But you obviously will get caught up in results. That's just the nature.
We are incredibly results oriented.
That's just the nature of your job.
Yeah.
And so, how do you manage expectations? How do you manage not just externally?
Sure.
Of course, the board and shareholders and all that stuff, but also internally.
It's all linked together. And one of the things that's different is, we're incredibly results oriented, but here we're results oriented over a period of time. So my job is to deliver good returns for shareholders over a period of time, not every night. And by the way, there's a real big difference to that because, we'll have good days and bad days. But we get to put a plan in place that says over the next 3 to 5 years, here's what we're going to do. And here's what we think we can deliver. And then we're going to be held accountable to it. But that's very different than what'd you do today? What'd you do tomorrow? What'd you do the next day? And, I think one of the things, that's evolved in our business was a business that was very much day-to-day opportunity set. And as the business has evolved, it's now a business that requires more investment, more planning, more technology. And those things are things that you have to do adhering to a plan to deliver over a period of time. And so, look, one of the things I'm very focused on, and this is something that any new CEO focuses on any large public company, is what's our plan going to be? And how are we going to articulate it and communicate it? And then how's the world going to hold us accountable for delivering on it over a period of time? And that's something our leadership team's very focused on right now.
All right, David, I want to be respectful of your time. I really appreciate you. Unfortunately, we did not get to talk about wine.
That's okay. We can find another time in the summer to have a glass of wine together.
But really appreciate you taking the time. And this has been a really fun conversation for me. Thank you so much.
Well, I really appreciate you doing this, and really fun for me, and great to see you again. And look forward to continuing the discussion.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, JJ.
Right,
yes.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the JJ Redick podcast. It was an absolute pleasure to have Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon on. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. We will be back soon with a mailbag pod. Tommy and I have really enjoyed doing these mailbag pods. This will be our third one. You can send in all of your questions and comments to the Ringer, and I look forward to answering your questions on the next mailbag pod. Also, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, all the good stuff. Look forward to talking to you guys soon.